All right, we are live. Let's go ahead and make sure that we're live on Instagram and on Rumble as well. I finally got Rumble to work here. Okay, so we are live on X, YouTube, Facebook. We got Instagram going. Let's make sure Rumble is going. You guys are gonna have to be patient with me on Rumble. I'm not sure. I see the setup for the live here, but I'm not sure if it's actually live. Um, Not sure if I got it to work. Let's see. Let's see. It looks like it's upcoming. There. Yep, I got it to go. Okay, so we are live on Rumble as well. So you just look my name, Joshua Fontanilla, and follow me on Rumble as well. I don't post there very often, but I'm going to start back up as you can tell. So let me start off by introducing myself because I got a lot of new followers, especially on YouTube. Some shorts I did well, and so I got a lot of new followers. Just give you guys the brief overview of who I am and my background before we go into the topic today. The topic today is, and I named it two different things. I have a coming civil war. And then on Rumble, I like the title I gave on Rumble better. The title on Rumble is, or no, did I do it on Facebook? The title I gave on Facebook is Left versus Right Civil War. And then is that prophecy? Is that predicted? So that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at the idea. We're going to try and answer the question, is a civil war between the left and the right predicted in prophecy? I'll give you the short answer. Kinda. It gets more complicated than that, obviously. What I'm talking about in specifically, maybe not, but as we look into it, you'll see that the general idea of a battle between the left or the right is in prophecy. Whether or not it'll happen in the U.S. in the terms of a civil war in the U.S., that's more of a conjecture. So, well, you guys, it'll make more sense as we go along. We're going to be looking. Our study today is going to be on Daniel chapter 11, by the way. So if you've never studied this, which is one of the hardest passages in the Bible, in Bible prophecy to understand, I would say that and the seven trumpets, for me at least, of Revelation. For me, those are some of the hardest topics to understand, which we'll go into the seven trumpets maybe later on this week. But we're going to do Daniel 11 today. It's going to be a brief overview, so we're not going to dig too deep, but we will cover it. All right, so who am I? For the new people who are here, obviously, my name is Joshua Fontanilla. You can find the channel on just looking for my name on X, YouTube, Facebook, Rumble, Instagram. Find me on all those places, TikTok, although we're not live on TikTok. And you can follow there. I am a former public high school teacher from California. I live in Florida now, as many people do. Went to church a couple weeks ago, and the pastor asked the question, how many of you here are local Floridians? And of the whole congregation, I think there was one hand raised, and the pastor himself was from Florida. Everyone else was a transplant. So I'm one of the many, but I'm one of the I'm one of the ones that came to Florida not to ruin it and turn it into a new California. So Floridians, don't be mad at me. But I escaped during I use the word escaped during COVID, during the the craziness that happened there. I had to leave. It was becoming clear they were either going to force me as a public high school teacher in California to teach all the trans nonsense, and start respecting pronouns of my high school students, or they were going to force me to take the shot. And I wasn't going to do either. And so my wife and I quit and moved to Florida and taught online and opened our own online school. And it has been a rocky road. We had to cash out our retirement in order to do this, our teacher's retirement, in order to start our own online school, which we have. You can check out at thinkexodus.org. We run a K through 12 accredited online school, and we also have a supplemental program. That part's not accredited, but it's very cheap. $20 a month, called Young Patriots Academy, where we debunk leftist lies. I don't hate anyone. I don't hate anyone on either side of the political aisle, but I do think that leftism is a poison, and it's dangerous stuff that's being pushed on our children. So we debunk that stuff, and we do it in a way that middle school and high school kids can understand. So that is at youngpatriotsacademy.com. You can find that, or you can just find both schools at thinkexodus.org. So that's my background. In addition, I am a Christian. I have been a Christian since I was about 20, raised Catholic, no longer Catholic. I'm a Protestant, Bible believer. And I've worked as an associate pastor in the past. Before I got into teaching, I was in ministry and did a lot of evangelism. So I have that as a background, teaching and Bible as a background. And I'm also a business major. So these are, you can see the kind of stuff you'll get from me. All right. That's me. Hopefully that wasn't too long of an introduction for the new people, but, I have some comments here on Instagram. You are such a prude and you know it, jerk face. Jerk face. Fake propaganda jerk, and no with 7 or 8 O's. It's really good stuff. The left is not sending their best and their brightest, but that's okay. God bless you anyway. All right. So Daniel 11, how does that relate to the Civil War in America? All right, I'm going to leave Daniel 11 up here for a second. We'll talk about that in a second, but let's talk about this idea of a civil war between the left and the right. I think if you watch the news and if you're just paying attention, it's kind of obvious that we are headed towards a civil war. Now, whether or not it'll happen, I hope it doesn't. Let me be clear on that from the beginning, because a civil war is not pretty. It's not pretty. Anybody who's studied U.S. history knows it is a very ugly thing. So I hope it doesn't happen. If you wanted to know my personal opinion, I think we probably are headed there. And I think it's pretty obvious when you look at just what has happened from the Charlie Kirk assassination. The attitude that we've seen on the left is shocking. The amount of people who celebrated and don't care. I think the main problem that we have here in this country, and the reason we're not going to put the toothpaste back in the tube, so to speak, is because we have, as a nominally Christian nation, we fell asleep at the wheel for generations. And we just let this country just sink into being the level of Christianity in this country has declined greatly. The apostasy of the churches, the lackadaisicalness of our spirituality, we got rid of all of the morality laws in this country. And we thought, let's just see what happens. We kind of took this very libertarian perspective, which, not to bag on my libertarian friends, but it didn't work. The slippery slope is real. And what the prudes were saying in the 90s, hey, let's not legalize gay marriage. Let's not go crazy on abortion. Hey, let's, even before then, let's not get rid of no fault divorce and all these rules, all these morality laws that we used to have in this country. I remember when I was a kid, you go to the grocery store and there was only a certain type of music that was allowed in a public place on the grocery store. There was only certain things that would be allowed to be said on public TV. And nowadays, or on billboards, there was some common decency. Nowadays, you can see that stuff you can hear, the most grotesque, the most debauchery type of songs, just, walking into a gym or a grocery store or something like that. And so the morality of this country, we've let it tank. And the churches, there's too much false gospel being preached from pulpits for generations. And too many of our children, we've let them go to secular colleges where they're being brainwashed. And you do that over generations. And eventually the country, you create a large percentage of the country that is no longer Christian. And in fact, they've been turned into activists for the left. And we've let that go too far. And I don't think it's going to be easy to get the country back. And as there are even small attempts to get the country back, the left is freaking out. So, and the right is finally starting to wake up a bit. So I think what we have is look, this country, there are too many people who disagree. So not only disagree, but they fundamentally live in different worlds, different realities. There's a No Kings protest going on today. I can see them here in Florida, and they're all over the country. And these people, the left, look, don't don't misunderstand me. There's plenty of corruption and rhinos and fake, corrupt politicians on the right and so forth. But at least their ideas are not insane. And the left, man, these people live in a fantasy world. They truly believe that this country is just, genociding trans and black people, and that Donald Trump is a crazy dictator. It's delusional. It's not even close to reality. In fact, I wish the man was a little bit more a little bit more authoritarian. I don't want a king. I don't want a tyrant, but I wished he was a little bit more strong arm on some of the stuff. Some of the stuff he's just not even close to a dictator. Just not even close. It's delusional, is my point. So, how do you get those two to marry? How do you get those two to coexist? When a man like Charlie Kirk, who's a moderate, is killed and the leftists are, they're atheists. They don't care. There's no morality there. It's whatever the ends justifies the means. So they cheer this stuff on. And they think, oh, well, if you disagree with us, you're a racist Hitler. And so they think men like Charlie Kirk deserve it. It's sick, but that's what they think. How do you have harmony with people like that? How do you have a country with people like that? I don't think you can. And so I think eventually we are headed for a split and history will repeat itself. And that's something that I think is basically biblical. The idea that history will repeat itself. That's found in Ecclesiastes. The idea is, there's no new thing under the sun. What has been is what will be. There's no new thing under the sun, right? Another way of saying history will repeat itself. So I do think that we're headed towards some type of civil war. Now, I won't say hard and fast that that's prophetic, but I do think the general idea of a battle between left and right is found in prophecy. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the king of the north versus the king of the south in Daniel 11. And I'm not going to go into all the details, but I'm going to give you the gist right from the beginning, where I'm going with this. And some of this stuff, like I said, I'm not going to give you all the details today, so you don't need to take my word for it. You can go back and study these things later, because I'm just going to give you a brief overview. But here's the brief overview. The king of the north versus the king of the south in Daniel, it's really chapters 10 through 12, but we're going to focus on chapter 11, is the left versus the right. It's the left versus the right today. And more specifically, let's say right versus left. So the king of the north, very vaguely, is the right, and the king of the south, very vaguely, is the left. What do I mean by this? Let me go into more detail. But that's the gist of it. But let me go into more detail. Okay, so let me identify the north versus the south. I said right versus left. That very vaguely, again. Let me be more specific. So what does that mean, king of the north? So let's define king of the north. We'll start there first. I'm going to put this on the screen and make this larger. Okay, here we go. And I'll repost this later as a, all I'm doing is, for those who are going to listen to the audio later, all I'm doing, because this will be a podcast, is I'm putting the Bible verses on the screen. So right now we're in Daniel 11. And this will be posted as a video later. And the screens won't get larger and smaller then, but same idea. Okay, so from the north, if you look up the term from the north, very simple. In a Bible app, you will find it talks about Babylon. So in Jeremiah, it's predicted from the north, disaster will be poured out. Okay, so where does he come from? He comes from the north. From the north, I am going to bring against Tyre Nebuchadnezzar. That's the king of Babylon. This is Ezekiel 26:7. From the north, again, Jeremiah 50, verse 9. It's found in Ezekiel and Jeremiah the most. Here again, Ezekiel 26:7. From the north, I will bring King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Okay, so who is the king of the north? Very clearly, that was a reference in the Old Testament to Babylon. Why? Why was Babylon called the king of the north? I'm going to give you a map here for a second. That is not exactly the topic we're talking about, but it's got the map on there anyway. And I'll describe it for those listening to the podcast. So if you look at the Middle East, and you look at a map of, let's say from Egypt all the way, including where the Babylonian Empire was, just the whole Mediterranean, just that whole area of the Middle East with Israel in the middle, you'll see that on the left, Egypt is there, Israel's kind of in the middle, and then Babylon was to the right. Okay. That's generally on the map. And the map I have here right now is showing the divisions of the Roman Empire. Same area, but, it's different empires over time, obviously, so it's labeled differently. But Babylon was around the river Euphrates, and then you have Israel in the middle, and then you have Egypt on the left. Now, Babylon, even though it was to the right of Israel, was called the king of the north. Why? It's to the east. Why of Israel? Why did the Israelis, why did they call it the king of the north? Because when Babylon attacked Israel, it would come down from the north. It would go and come down from the north because it had to go these certain routes. The geography made it so that it would come down from the north. It would kind of go up and then back down in a loop and attack Israel from the north. So it was called, to the Jews, it was called the king of the north. That's Jeremiah. Ezekiel repeatedly calls it the king of the north. Egypt in the Old Testament was the king of the south. It would come from the south to attack Israel, even though it was southwest of Israel, but it would come from the south. So originally the king of the north and the king of the south was Babylon is the king of the north, Egypt is the king of the south. You with me so far? Okay. So Babylon is the king of the north. Let's go back to the Bible here. Babylon is the king of the north, and Egypt is the king of the south. That was the original. And in Bible prophecy, the way it works is often just starts with, here's the original name, and then that name just lasts continually throughout prophecy, even though the empire has changed and some of the details have changed. It just keeps the original name. So, for example, in Revelation, you see Babylon mentioned again, even though by the time John wrote Revelation, Babylon didn't exist as an empire. So the name is now used symbolically. So Babylon and King of the North are used symbolically to talk about another power, even though Babylon, the original king of the north, doesn't exist anymore. You with me? All right. And if there's questions, please type them in the chat. Let me know. I don't see any here other than, this guy still calling me a prude and a jerk face, but that's okay. All right. So that was the king of the north versus the king of the south. Babylon, king of the north, Egypt, king of the south. Now, this becomes symbolic later, and it talks about spiritual things later. So let me give you an example of this. If you go into Isaiah chapter 14, Isaiah 14, I believe this is the one. It's either Isaiah 14 or Ezekiel 28. These are the two passages that talk about Satan the most. Those two. Let's see. I'm looking for. It's around. Here we go. Yep, in the sides of the north. Here we go. So Isaiah chapter 14, starting in verse 12. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? Okay. So this is talking about, which it's talking about Lucifer. By the way, if you read the whole context, it's talking about the king of is it Babylon in this one? Yeah, the king of Babylon. And then it switches to talking about Lucifer. And the idea is that there's a parallel between the two because Lucifer is behind all the evil kings of this world. That's how Lucifer runs the world, is through possessing and guiding the fallen kings of this world. That's a basic view of prophecy throughout all prophecy and throughout the Bible, really. That's Satan's MO. He uses fallen kings. So the king of Babylon, he used them. And so there's a parallel drawn between the two in Isaiah 14 and in Ezekiel 28 between kings of the world and Satan or Lucifer. Anyway, so it talks about Lucifer and it's asking the question, how did you fall from heaven? Because he was once an unfallen angel. How did you fall? And then it answers the question. Verse 13, for you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. Now, the stars of God is a symbol for the angels of God. You find that in Revelation chapter 1. So he wanted to rule above the angels. Then he says, I will sit upon the mount of the congregation. So he's talking about God's throne, the mount of the congregation where all the angels would assemble and God would have his congregation in heaven. That's the mount of the congregation. And then it says, in the farthest sides of the north. So he wants to go to the top, to the north. And then it says, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. So he wanted to take God's place. But you notice it's talking about how he wants to go up above the stars of God. He wants to be on the top of the mountain. On the sides of the north, he will go above the heights of the clouds, and he wants to be like God. So up, 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 up. But in the Hebrew mind, north is symbolically related to up, to high, to spiritually high. So it's symbolic here. It's not saying that, literally that Satan's going to go to the North Pole. That's not the idea. It's symbolic, right? He's going to ascend to the heights of the clouds. And in the Hebrew mindset, north meant up. Now, spiritually, up means heaven, right? And we do that today. When we talk about God, we point up, right? But if you're in Australia versus the US, when you point up, you're pointing in different directions if you're being very literal, right? The Australians are on the bottom of the planet. When they point up, to us, it's down. But the idea is it's above us, right? You get the symbolism. So north in the Hebrew mindset, north just meant up, spiritually, above us. That's where God is. Okay? So north became to symbolize that which is above, the heavenly. So the king of the north originally was Babylon, attacking from literal north. But in Bible prophecy, it becomes symbolic. And now we're talking about Babylon, and it's a symbolic thing. And so north is no longer talking about points on a compass. Now it's talking about spiritual north, a empire symbolically called Babylon, which attacks God's people from the spiritual realm. In other words, to put it simply, it uses religion or a perversion of religion to attack God's people. Let me say that again to make it clear. Babylon, the king of the north, attacks God's people from the spiritual north, meaning it uses false religion to attack God's people. A perversion of Christianity. Is this anything new in the Bible? Well, let me ask you a question. Who killed Jesus? Well, that's a controversial one nowadays, right? we won't get ourselves banned, but but I will say that who killed Jesus was the religious leaders of the day. The religious leaders. That is who killed Jesus. You know, they use blasphemy laws to go after Jesus, right? That's the New Testament. It was the religious leader. And then who told the apostles, who banned them from speaking in the name of Jesus? The religious leaders. So you can see in the days of Christ, in the days of the apostles, an attack on the church using a perversion of religion. In this case, and in that case, it was the Sanhedrin. It was the religious leaders of the Jews claiming the authority to say you cannot speak in the name of Jesus. Later on, we see that same thing repeated. So let me give you an example of this, just to drive the point home. Yesterday was the anniversary, and I'm looking this up because I want to get the facts right. Yesterday was the anniversary in 1555. The English reformers Nicholas Ridley and Hugh Latimer were burned at the stake. Do you know that? Go look that history up. Who did it? Bloody Mary. You've heard of Bloody Mary? She was the Catholic Queen Mary of Tudor. And she had these Protestant reformers burned at the stake for the capital offense of preaching the gospel, believing in a way that the official church disagreed with. And so, do you think Satan was using Mary to attack God's people by outlawing the preaching of the gospel? Absolutely, Satan was using a queen or king of this world to attack God's people using a perversion of religion. It was no different than when the religious leaders in the days of Christ used their supposed authority to kill him or to forbid the apostles from preaching in his name. No different. Same idea. The history of repeating, right? So this is, and you can read about this in Fox's Book of Martyrs. This is, I mean, there's countless stories have been like this. And if you want to know more about this and about this subject, I have a series called The New World Order and Bible Prophecy on my YouTube. I highly recommend watching the whole thing. I think it's a 9-part series, and I think I'm on part 7 or 8. Yeah, I've done all the way through part 7 now. So check that out. You'll see the idea. So that's the king of the north. So if the king of the north attacks God's people using a perversion of religion, using a false version of either in the time of Christ, Judaism, or in the time, or in modern times, or in the Middle Ages, using a perversion of Christianity, not real Bible Christianity, but a perversion of it, then what would the South be? Well, if spiritual north is attacking God's people from the religious side, from the spiritual above, then what would below be? Here's one. Jesus told, here, let's see, above and below. Let's see if we can find this passage. Here it is, John chapter 8. That's what I'm looking for. John chapter 8, and let's expand for the whole chapter. This is verse 23. So let's expand the whole thing. New King James, expand it. All right. Verse 23. This is Jesus speaking to religious leaders. He said unto them, you are from beneath, I am from above. You are of this world. I am not of this world. So below means of this world, right? Above means spiritual of things. So to attack God's people from the north means spiritually to attack them. To attack them from the south means below or earthly. So if the north is a perversion of religion and a false version of Christianity, which, by the way, Jesus predicted this. Do you know that? Jesus predicted this in John chapter 16, verse 2. It says, They will put you out of the synagogues. Yes, the time is coming when whoever kills you will think that he offers God service. That's what I'm talking about with the king of the north. If that's an attack from the religious north, then from the south would be secular or worldly, of this world, the opposite of religion, the absence of religion. It would be to attack God's people from the secular side. So the king of the south is the secular side, the non-religious side, the absence of religion. Originally, remember, let's look at the map again. Originally, the south was Egypt, and this is found symbolically in prophecy as well. The south was Egypt, and it attacked from the south. The north was Babylon. Egypt was the empire that symbolized the rejection of in some ways the rejection of religion, even though they had their like 50 billion gods, whatever, that they believed in. In some ways it symbolized the rejection of religion, because the Egyptian king, the Pharaoh, when he was spoken to by Moses, said, "Who is the Lord?" I don't know the Lord. Who is the Lord, right? So it's this idea of questioning religion in general, of rejecting religion. So Egypt came to symbolize that kind of, man's strength. And this is found in prophecy as well. So if you go to, let's see, it's going to be Revelation chapter 11. Revelation chapter 11. Egypt is symbolically mentioned here in verse 8. It says, "And their dead bodies will lie in the street of that city, which is called Sodom and Egypt." There's your king of the south again. There's your parallel with Daniel chapter 11. And I'll give you guys a principle on this. In Bible prophecy, a lot of the same message is repeated over and over again, just using different symbols. It's no different than when Jesus spoke in parables and he used multiple symbols to tell the same thing. The kingdom of heaven is like this. The kingdom of heaven is like that. The kingdom of heaven is like, and he used multiple things to describe the kingdom of heaven. Different symbols, same point, but you're getting it from a different angle. Same thing with prophecy. Daniel chapter 11 uses king of the north versus king of the south. Revelation uses Babylon, and now we have Egypt, but it's the same idea. Egypt was the original. Oh, wait, I didn't put this on the screen. Hold on. Sorry about that. We're in Revelation chapter 11, verse 8. It uses Sodom and Egypt. And this is the same idea as the king of the south. All right. We don't have the time to go into all the details on the king of the north versus the king of the south. I'm going to recommend this. This is a study. If you do a search on this right here, Daniel 11, study by Dr. Norman McNulty, there's going to be some stuff in there. If you've never studied this before, that's going to blow your mind. And it's going to be very deep because, like I said, Daniel 11 and 12 are one of the hardest passages to understand in prophecy. But this will give you a lot, and you may not understand it all the first time you read it, but you're going to get a lot, and you'll understand the basics, I think, of Daniel 11. So, all right. So we've identified the king of the north versus king of the south. Now let me go into more on this. And this is what he talks about in his. And then we're going to bring it back to left versus right today, because that's our point. Civil war versus left versus right. The Roman Empire, when it was divided, and we're talking mainly the Western Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, it doesn't matter as much in Bible prophecy. A lot of people have trouble with this, and they think Bible prophecy is supposed to be like a geography lesson. That's not the point. It's not the point. Bible prophecy is about God's people. So it doesn't really say a lot about like the Aztecs. It doesn't say much about the Eskimos, because they didn't have anything to do with God's people at the time. And so who was God's people during the Middle Ages? It's the church. Where was the church? Largely in Europe. And so a lot of Bible prophecy that covers the Middle Ages is going to be talking about Europe. That's just reality. It's not going to talk a lot about the Amazon. That's just reality. So the Western Roman Empire is the focus here. And when Rome was divided, it was divided into 4 parts. And then it became kind of a North versus South thing. So you had the Seleucid Empire, and which later became kind of Greek, kind of merged that way. I know this is not a perfect description of history. I'm being very general here if you're a history buff. And then in the South, the Roman Empire, it was Northern Africa, and that was where Egypt was. So Bible prophecy picks this up. And this division between the Northern and the Southern Empire of Rome is mentioned, and that's the original King of the North versus King of the South. And then it merges as the prophecy keeps going, because those empires change, but the names stay the same. Some of this stuff is going to be confusing, but the bigger picture, at least, I think you're going to understand. So later on, the idea of the secular South, who takes that on later? Who takes on the idea of being this kind of anti-God secular empire in modern times? That would be the communist empires and the atheistic empires. So, you're talking Egypt, you're talking places like France, where the Communist Manifesto was written, where they had the French Revolution that was atheistic, and they killed a bunch of priests, and they were very anti-religion. And so you can trace kind of the communist reign and the communist ideology. You can trace it through Egypt into France, into the USSR later, the Soviet Empire, and now China, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. So the King of the South today is going to be those secular, remember, from the South, from the worldly, anti-religion, the communist empires and the secular political powers of this world. Who would that be in American politics? Who's going to align with that in American politics? That would be the left. Now we're bringing it full circle. So the whole first half hour was explaining so we could get there. But the left, when you hear left in Daniel 11, think King of the South. Okay, well, who would the right be then? That would be the North, the King of the North, and I'm talking very vaguely, because the King of the North, more specifically in prophecy, is dealing with the perverted and apostate fallen churches. Organized religion, the organized churches today, the ones that, you see them with the rainbow flags in front of their churches, and they're bringing masses of third world refugees into the US and into Western empires or Western countries in Europe, and they're destroying those countries, and they're teaching that we need to have socialism and we need to have redistribution of wealth. So you see that coming even from the Pope and from Catholic circles, but you see it also from like the Lutheran churches. You see them with, female trans bishops and all this kind of stuff. These are perversions of religion. You see where I'm going? This is more specifically the King of the North. But in general, the idea of attacking God's people using a perversion of religion, using fallen churches, that's going to be the King of the North. And I know there's some overlap here, and you're going to say, well, what you're talking about, like Lutheran churches, and it's all over. But the general idea is King of the North is the religious powers and the religious political powers today. And when I say religion, I'm meaning perversion of Christianity. And so that's going to be politically, if we were talking left versus right today, that would be the right. That would be the right. That would be the King of the North. All right, let's go back to the Bible here. North versus South. Let's go back to Daniel 11. So North versus South, Daniel 11, King of the North versus King of the South is right versus left. Very just vaguely. Okay? So it's the battle between the North versus the South. And that battle, if you read the King of the North versus the King of the South battle in Daniel 11, you see that they fight each other, especially toward the end of time. Daniel 11 verse 40, and then at the time of the end shall the King of the South push at him, that's the King of the North, and the King of the North shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, with horsemen, with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. So the King of the North wins eventually. The King of the South pushes at him, makes an attack, but he loses. There is a battle in this country right now, left versus right, and the corollary in Bible prophecy is the King of the North versus the King of the South. I can't go into all the details of how it's all going to end, but I do think that it's going to, we are headed that direction. Again, and I'm going to wrap this up soon. But again, I'm not saying that a civil war in the U.S. is specifically predicted in prophecy. That's not what I'm saying. I do think that the general idea of North versus South, spiritually, King of the North versus King of the South, which means a battle between the nominal religious, the nominal Christian world, which we know, if you just pay attention, you look at the majority of organized churches, they're fallen. The majority of organized churches is fallen. Now, you may go to some small, nice church somewhere, and they're still preaching the Bible, and praise God for that. But the majority of organized churches today are completely off their rocker. And the teachings are way out there. And and it's going to get worse. Even the ones, well, let me just repeat what I said before. John 16 verse 2, the time is coming when he who kills you will think that he's doing God's service. I highly recommend watching my New World Order and Bible Prophecy series. I go into more details there. And then the King of the South, the left, they're insane. They're from their views and on, their ideology is nuts. The way they practice it is nuts. And there's a battle between these two groups. That's the general idea. So is there going to be a civil war in the U.S.? Personally, I think yes. I will not say for sure. I'm not saying that it's a very specific prophecy that's predicted, but I do think the battle between the two groups over time is predicted in prophecy. So to be more specific about this, the King of the North versus the King of the South, Daniel 11, I highly recommend studying this later and going to that place, this website that I mentioned, which is thegreatcontroversy.info. And it's a study, Daniel 11 by Norman McNulty. I highly recommend that. But the idea of a battle between these two groups is because Daniel 11 is incredible. The history that it covers. Daniel 11, do you know Daniel 11 predicted Julius Caesar? He's in there. Daniel 11 predicted the fall of communism. Daniel 11, it gives you a sweep of basically all of church history, all of Christian history from the time of Christ till the end of time. That's basically what Daniel 10 through 12, that's what it is. And Daniel 11's the kind of the meat of it. It gives you the whole of history. It just goes through the whole thing and gives you the highlights from the time of Christ till the end of time. So I highly recommend it. And it starts talking about the, Babylon and, the Greek Empire that comes after Babylon, or the Persian Empire that comes after Babylon. So Xerxes is predicted in there. The Artaxerxes, then it goes into Alexander the Great is predicted in Daniel, and the Greek Empire, and then it goes into the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire dividing into pieces. And then this king of the north versus king of the south becomes a symbol for later empires. And so then we get into the reign of the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, and that continues. And then we have this division between kind of the West, the Christian West, versus communism. And that becomes like the main theme toward the end of time, is communism versus the Christian West. And that is the king of the north versus the king of the south. The king of the north being the Christian West, and the king of the south being the communist powers. So, the USSR and so forth. And I mean, I don't have time to go into all the details of this, but that gives you an overview, and it's a fascinating study. I highly recommend it. All right. I don't think I had any questions. So if you do have questions later on this, let me know in the chat. I'll be happy to answer them. I'm going to go through, I try to give you guys something Bible prophecy and relate it to current events. So I have one on Revelation and the 7 trumpets. If you're curious about that, I may try and do that later on this week. And I'm going to relate it to immigration and the flood of illegal immigration. So that one's coming up. Stay tuned for that. Also, I have a study on the U.S. and Bible prophecy that I'm going to hopefully record later on today. The U.S. is predicted in Bible prophecy. That becomes very clear. This study I just did now was a little bit more vague, to be honest. I didn't give you all the details because I wanted to give you an overview. When I go into the U.S. and Bible prophecy, you will see that one is very specific. Absolutely, America is predicted in prophecy. And, I'm a patriot, but we got to share the good and the bad, right? And so there's some bad stuff that's heading towards America in the future. I highly recommend watching my series on the New World Order and Bible prophecy. And if you're curious on how Israel comes in and dispensationalism, I also have a series on Israel and Armageddon on my YouTube. So follow me on YouTube, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. This video is on Rumble, X, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. You can find me on all those platforms, and I will be posting this later as a podcast as well on Apple Podcast and Spotify. All right, I think we're good for today. If you do have any questions on this subject, feel free to put them out in the comments, and I'll try maybe to answer those or make a video about it later. God bless you guys, and we will see you next time. Thank you for joining and for watching this.